Welcome, Irish fans, to this week's edition of the Jack Swarbrick Show. On this week's show, we will feature the Notre Dame basketball team, specifically Notre Dame basketball captains Lindsey Allen and Steve Astoria. First, I want to get right to it and welcome in your host and namesake of this show, Notre Dame Vice President and Director of Athletics, Jack Swarbrick, who I know watched the college football playoff game with great interest. Both as a fan and because you are so involved in this entity.
Yeah, I've developed an interesting habit around this game. We being the College Football Playoff Management Committee, always meets at the game, and so I'm always there. I was there. Get my days confused, but I guess I was there Saturday or Sunday, and then meetings during the day on Monday, and then I fly out in the mid-afternoon. So while the airport the next day is impossible, that airport in whatever city you're in is pretty manageable right before the game. Actually, one year I flew out over the stadium as they were starting. But my flights this time did allow me to make it back home and in time to see what was a really good game for college football. It went too long. Which is my one complaint. It was really long.
Now, some of the reasons, I mean, I've got my own ideas. So why do you think it went too long?
Well, I think there are two significant contributing factors. One is we replayed everything in that game. I thought it was excessive.
And I'm a little, why does it take so long to replay? Because it appears, watching at home, that you can come to an indisputable decision much more quickly than the officials are. That said, our views are not determining the outcome of a game.
Yeah, and I think, part of that's the personality of the people involved. I do think the national championship probably presents our best case, and the semifinals, for a centralized replay model like the NBA uses. Two conferences, the ACC and the SEC, piloted that model this year. I happen to think it's a better model. But regardless of whether it is, the championship game's the one to use it. Let's have a room full of guys, a lot of monitors who can apply sort of a collective judgment quickly. But I think, I thought the most interesting in that regard was the sort of the seemingly endless review at the end of the game, where I know there were a lot of things to look at on that onside kick, but some of it you knew immediately, right? I mean, did it go 10 yards? You knew immediately. So now Clemson's got the ball either way.
So they're going to kneel down.
Is there no time where they kneel
doesn't really
down?
matter.
That's
it's
right.
Not like they're running a play.
So let's move this along. So I think that was part of it, and then I don't think we're unique. I think the Super Bowl is probably the same way, but the commercial load goes up in the championship game, and so when you combine those two things, it made for what I thought was a bit of an overly long night.
Well, and the third thing you add to that as a longtime broadcaster myself is it's the most high-profile game of the year, so your production staff wants to use all of their toys and all of their replays, and you've got a sideline reporter on each side, and you've got the telestrator, and that adds a lot to it as well, because I know you're asked a lot about the length of Notre Dame games. And the commercial breaks really are not that longer, but there are times when I review the broadcast that, well, they stick in a bunch of promos, and then they go to the booth, and then they show more replays.
Right.
And for the people sitting in the stands, that it doesn't matter what the specific reason is, it just makes the game long.
You're right. It is those other things which aren't additional ads, but the sideline reporter, the going to the booth, it really does add to the length of the game. And the challenge of that is, and there's no way around it, you are more likely to be impacting momentum from the production truck than you really than we want you to be, right? I mean, because you get critical momentum swings in games where something like that can really stop you.
Now, clearly, on most football Saturdays, you have a vested interest in one team in particular. And I know just monitoring and only tweeted a couple of times, but the social media world last night, Notre Dame fans noticed a few things. Targeting calls that weren't called that they believe have been called on Notre Dame. And even more, Clemson scored on 2 pick plays, neither one of which was called, that looked disturbingly similar to calls that have gone against Notre Dame, which I guess in part just indicates how hard it is to officiate the game.
It is, although it also points to the inconsistency from crews by conference.
Yep.
And that's another thing. We've got to figure out a way to get our hands around a little more. I know we won't unify the officiating. It's not going to happen. But I think we can unify the training and education a bit more than we do, and that could help. There was a great official when I started out in this business who used to always say, you got to ask yourself 3 things before you ever blow your whistle in a basketball game or throw your flag in a football game. What did I see? Is it a foul? And did it have consequence? And we define some rules in the game for which that third question should never be asked. And so we don't want that question asked on the targeting call, for example, right?
Yes.
But none of us who are in the game want a holding call on the other side of the field that has no consequence called, right? I mean, it just doesn't. No.
Neither team does.
That's right. You want some.
There has to be an advantage gained.
Some level of discretion here. And that was always the issue for me with our most famous coming out on the wrong side of a pick play, that even if you answered the first 2 questions, I did see something. It is a foul. What you also saw clearly on that in that particular case was the defenders blew the coverage. One was playing zone, and one was playing man. If we hadn't had anybody out there, it was gonna be a successful completion, and so I think that's part of it. Conversely, last night on the pick, I had a little bit of a different reaction. It didn't bother me very much because the Alabama defender clearly held, and in fact helped make the pick. The Clemson receiver who comes in to set the pick, the Alabama defender is essentially grabbing him, and he's making a bigger pick.
I still think on the Corey Robinson CJ Precise play that the Florida State defender had it grabbed and held CJ. And they got CJ for the contact when actually he was pulled in.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, well, on that one, he's either got to turn or keep running, which you don't, And the Alabama or the Clemson receiver, to his credit, was continuing on his pattern in, which you're allowed to do. He sort of got grabbed, and then it was an insurmountable pick. But Alabama contributed to it a little bit. Relative to the 2 teams, at the outside of your question, I will say I was rooting hard for Clemson, not because I don't like Alabama. I do. I have great respect for their AD and their coach, and it's a phenomenal program. But we have a real interest in the ACC's success, obviously.
Absolutely.
And so we are always, when we're not directly involved, hoping that the ACC does well. And the ACC has done spectacularly well in football in recent years. It's gotten a little bit lost. Every one of the games has had an ACC participant in it. We won more bowl games this year than any other conference. We had more wins out of conference than any team in any conference in football. It has been a lights-out year for the ACC.
And I heard a number of commentators, we're taping this on Tuesday right after the championship game, say that they thought this year the ACC was indeed the top college football conference. And again, nothing against Alabama. They've been the gold standard the last decade for success on the football field. I think it was good for college football that they didn't win it again, just to get some other blood in there and kind of prove to folks that, you know what, you don't have to roll over or give up or do extraordinary things to be competitive, that you can just be competitive if you do things the right way.
Yeah, and I could make an argument that dynasties help sport too. I mean, during the heyday of the Yankees or
they're still
some
in the title
others,
game, so that's still kind of a dynasty.
Yeah, but so it wasn't so much that I thought there was benefit in Alabama not winning as the ACC's profile helps us a lot because it means every ACC game we play is perceived favorably and has better impact on our strength of scheduling.
Getting back to the rules for a sec, as far as picks concerned, my 2 cents is I think they should kind of rewrite the rule, because I think if you can run your receivers in an area and create traffic, that shouldn't be a violation. But the one that they still have to get their arms around is the targeting call. And I got into it in a very friendly manner today with somebody through Facebook messaging who said, well, I've talked to officials, they call it the juice theory, and early in the game everybody's juices are flowing and it's too early to throw a guy out because it impacts the game. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier. It's not about impacting the game or helping one team or the other. It's about protecting the health of players. And he said, well, how many concussions? I didn't hear any concussions last night. I said, in all honesty, these folks may not figure out if they suffered any damage for 20 or 30 years. That's what you're trying to protect. And right now it just is way too inconsistent. And there are a lot of players who are taking severe blows to the head and nothing's being called.
It's a complete mess. It more than anything exposes the challenges of not having a unified officiating system, because I talk to the commissioners all the time, and they have different standards that are being applied. So one conference will have a standard. If there is any chance it's a target, you throw the flag, because it then gives the review booth the opportunity to review that under what I'll call normal circumstances. Mm-hmm. If you fail to throw the flag on the field and then the review booth comes in, it's got a much higher burden, if you will, for establishing whether or not there was a targeting, right? So it's small things like that that create a difference, but we just, in my judgment, we just got a wrong-headed approach to sort of defining this, right? It is about player safety, and it ought to just be blows to the head, right? I mean, there's got to be some measure of a blow to the head that results in a penalty.
And it's written that way now. If you go into it, people think it's crown of helmet, or you have to be defenseless for crown of helmet. If the defensive player, and it should be anybody, if I hit you with my forearm in your head and you're deemed defenseless, and I think they have to take that away to a degree as well, because how do you determine that? Somebody's arguing me that Hunter Torrey wasn't defenseless in the Texas game this year, so that's why they didn't call it. Well, if you're not looking at the guy and you're trying to catch the ball and you get hit, you're defenseless. It's too complicated. If you get hit in the head, you get hit in the head.
Well, that's where I'd like to head. And I understand why the rule's there, right? So we got frustrated in a game against Pittsburgh a few years ago where we lost Stephon Tuitt because the offensive player lowered his head, right? Well, that's a consequence I think you have to live with. I think we're trying to protect kids, and yes, there's never been intention associated with this, and you may get some really unfair results because the offensive player did move his head or something else intervened. But my reaction is sort of, I don't care. First and foremost, we're protecting players, and if that helps protect players, we ought to do it.
So that brings me to my next question, and you may have heard one of my diatribes over the year about wanting national officiating crews. And basketball has changed a bit. When I first started doing Notre Dame games in the 80s, the conferences were very strong, and Notre Dame usually hired Big Ten officials who adopted Notre Dame. And I'll be honest, there were some Big Ten officials that blew a great whistle for Notre Dame inside then the ACC. Now they are being mixed together more. Officials are working 3 and 4 conference, and you are seeing more consistent officiating with certain rules. I think I know what the obstacle is. So how do we overcome the obstacles of the conference's comfort level with being able to control officials in non-conference games to get to the point where I know it's going to cost some money, and a lot of money is generated. Why can't we have NCAA national officials who answer to one body, one organization, and have no connection to conferences?
I don't think you can for football.
And that's
because of the scheduling dynamic, frankly.
Okay.
You know, I don't think you're going to be able to get there. I do think we can nationalize the replay officials, and we should. I think we can nationalize the function, but even short of that, let's replay the national. You need 65 of them or 70 of them. You can train them centrally and have them all applying the same standards. Basketball has been helped greatly, not only by some of the selection of the officials, but by great use of video training. You know, you get points of emphasis videos all through the year that ensure some consistency, that say this is how this play should be called, here's why.
And everybody gets to see it.
Everybody
Coaches
sees
get
it.
to see it, and the media gets to see it.
Public can see it.
Yeah.
And it's very helpful. You know, it runs a risk that you get over technical officiating, and I think sometimes we're guilty of that. You know, if the arm's at this angle versus this angle, it's a blocking foul. But that's okay. I'd rather have that and have everybody being trained the same way. I think that basketball officiating, I've never seen a game where I wasn't upset at a call, but I think basketball officiating is as good now as any time I can remember.
And it may be among, you know, it's hard to say one's the hardest game to call, but from my limited rec league officiating career, it is a very difficult game to call. And you always remember, even when I'm doing a game and I had to see the replay in slow motion twice to make a decision, the officials don't get that chance. And they actually do a very good job.
Well, you know it from where you sit, but sit baseline at a basketball game and try and call the out of bounds. It's almost impossible. Yeah. It's right on top of you. Everybody in the stadium or the arena has a better look
because they're
at that because they've got some perspective on it. That poor baseline official, it's at his feet. And the number of times they get that right amazes me because physically you literally can't see it. You're taking a whole bunch of cues from the players and the crowd and what you think you saw. But yeah, no, I think it's good. And for the record, I think the single hardest sport to officiate is women's lacrosse because I can't figure it out at all.
Well, women's lacrosse, I've called a few games, and I agree with you. And there are people just running all over the place. Very fast game. It's an exciting game if you've never watched it, but it's just going all over the place. And when you call it, you just say there's a violation. Everything's a violation, and you say where the ball is and who's got it. Moving to basketball, however, you have got under your purview 2 basketball teams that are playing very good basketball again right now.
Yeah, and they're playing so well, both the women's and men's team. But what's so fun, from my perspective, is the way they play, because they play the game so well. And what that says about the university and the young people that are here. We got really bright kids who are so well coached by 2 of the best coaches in all of basketball. And we just play it a way everybody appreciates. When I'm down in Tampa and with other ADs and commissioners, a number of them would come up to me and make some version of that comment, like, "Boy, I love watching you guys play." Well, they do because of the way we approach the game, and that's so fun to be associated with those programs.
And we have one of the captains of both the men's and women's team here today, and both of them coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, when you talk about great student athletes, they are both successfully enrolled in the Mendoza College of Business.
Yeah, well, you got to be able to make decisions on the court and in business, and so they are trained to do both well.
We are going to get to our first guest, and we didn't select one as more important than the other. It all comes down to scheduling, even during break, and Steve Astoria was able to get here first, so Notre Dame men's basketball captain will join us in just a moment. We'll be right back.
I play because I love it, the enjoyment and excitement you get when you play.
Whenever we go out and play a home game, I know to expect at least 8,000 people. It really just pumps me up.
It's an unreal feeling just knowing that everyone's there to watch you do what you love.